Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl Podcast, a 3-time award-winning show that aims to motivate and inspire you while increasing the amount of female role models in the media, especially in relation to adventure and physical challenges. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. If you're passionate about adventure, challenge and learning from women who have overcome obstacles and achieved remarkable things, then this is the podcast for you. Every Tuesday at 7 a.m, new episodes go live featuring incredible women who share their stories, insights and tips to help you achieve your dreams and goals. You can support the Tough Girl mission by signing up as a patron. Visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast. Keep listening until the very end as I share more information about what's going on with me with Tough Girl Challenges, give shout outs and recommend other Tough Girl Podcast episodes. More information can be found at toughgirlchallenges.com.
I'm Josie Fouts, or Miss Stubbornness on Instagram, and I am an Asian American adoptee and amputee. So I'm currently based in San Diego, California, and I am, pun intended, single-handedly trailblazing for mountain biking to be a Paralympic sport.
I love it. And I also love your Instagram handle. Well, your Instagram sort of intro, which is like mad scientist on a mission to single-handedly save the world with cycling. Definitely can't wait to delve into all of that. You said your nickname was like Miss Stubbornness. Was that a nickname that you got from like family or friends? You know, where did that come from?
I kind of reinvented myself during the pandemic and that name stuck with me. I like it because it's not just punny, it's also true. That's my form of humor. And so stubborn is definitely an adjective that has been describing me ever since I was a kid. So growing up with congenital disability, I always wanted to do things on my own. And I would basically not stop or accept help until I could do it. And so when I thought about it, I was just like, oh, it's funny because I'm also born with a stub, but also very stubborn. And I don't know if anybody's into astrology either, but my birthday is July 4th. So I'm both a firecracker and also my zodiac sign is Cancer, which are notorious for being stubborn as well.
So when you were younger and growing up, you know, were you sporty, active, like outdoorsy? You know, what were your early years like?
I was born in Seoul, Korea, but then adopted when I was 6 months old. So I grew up in Ohio with my family and I loved sports. I loved all the sports and it was almost like the more difficult the sport was for me, the more I enjoyed it. So it's funny, I've done all the ball sports except for soccer, which is the only one that requires you to not use your hands. But I think I really enjoyed trail running and cross country the most because of how accessible it is. You really just need a pair of shoes. So that stuck with me throughout my life.
When did you get involved with cycling?
So I got into cycling when I moved to San Diego, which is notorious for great weather. And the way that I saw it, it was an easy way to not just transport myself to my job, which was 14 miles away from where I lived, but it was also a way for me to be active and stay active. A lot of times for me, I like incorporating something new into my routine rather than taking time out of my day to make it fit. But I think it also goes back to that stubborn mindset where I enjoy things that are more difficult and challenging because the reward is much greater. Because it would be really easy for me to, you know, commute the same way everybody else does, which is typically just by your own vehicle or car. But commuting the same way as everybody else means that you are a part of traffic. So the way that I saw it was, okay, I take an hour out of my day to be stuck in traffic and be frustrated at everybody else. Or I ride my bicycle for the same amount of time, get there literally in the same amount, in the same hour. But instead of being frustrated with everybody else who I saw also on a bike, we could work together. We were able to talk to each other. There weren't barriers like physical walls and doors and windows separating us. it would always start off like, hey, are you just trying not to get hit today and survive? And then the other person would be like, yeah. And so we could actually like use aerodynamics and drafting to get to where we're going faster. And it'd also be more enjoyable. And it created a sense of community.
How does it work with your arm? So I've seen a picture where you've got like an attachment which attaches to your bike. Or can you just ride one-handed?
So when I first started commuting, I didn't use any adaptations. I didn't even move my saddle height just because growing up with a congenital disability, you just find a way to make it work. And I really leaned into that mindset and I was just like, nothing's going to suit me. So why even try? And cycling's great because it helped me transform that stubborn mindset and doing things on my own into actually asking for help and being able to then make the bike adapt to me rather than me adapting to the bike. So I started off not using anything, which meant when I was riding, I wasn't necessarily gripping my bars, which means that I wasn't leveraging them. So essentially, I was just riding my bike with no hands, but like resting them on the bars for just stability. That's kind of how I started cycling in 2017 when I moved to San Diego. And then when I decided to quit my job and start training full time for paracycling in the Tokyo Paralympics, decided to try to use a couple of adaptations, but I started really small. So it started off with like a PVC pipe end kind of just mounted to the bars. And then, of course, that's not the way that is meant to be used. So there's always some adjusting with like shims and everything. And then that transformed into using a prosthesis. And then it transformed into me finding better, not just prosthetic providers, but also attachments for cycling as well. So there's a lot of things out there, and my journey has been pretty concentrated in the past 4 years of trying to figure out what works for me rather than against me.
I just want to take you back. So you said 2017, you're working in San Diego, you're cycle commuting to work every day. But then in 2018, you quit your job and decided to train for the Paralympics. I'd love to hear more about that decision, how it came about, what the thought process was.
It just came down to kind of, I think, the way that I saw myself. Like my whole life, I adapted, and really, I learned I can, because I have an adaptive mindset, I can thrive in any situation compared to somebody who has a fixed mindset and needs to plan things out and like their whole day is scheduled. It's really hard for them to understand where I'm coming from. But it really was a no-brainer for me. Like the way I saw it was I get to not just get into the best shape of my life, whether I make it to the games or not, but I also get to hang out with a pretty cool community. The San Diego cycling community in general is super supportive, and they supported my decision 100% in ways that I've never been supported in my past. To me, there's no real losing. I knew that no matter what I do, I'll be great at it. I think when I have had that life experience with an adaptive mindset, that it makes seemingly scary decisions for people with fixed mindsets really easy to make. So like work just gets stressful, just like everybody else's job. I get to a point where I feel like I'm underappreciated and I'm overworked and underpaid. And I took a step back and I noticed, I think it was like there were three red flags. One was I started getting a gray hair, literally just one gray hair when I was working. And two, I noticed that cycling and my commute started becoming the best part of my day. And three, my partner at the time also told me that he noticed in my behavior that work was stressing me out while I wasn't even at work. And I was like, oh, well, I know where this is headed. Like, I'm going to either, turn into a workaholic and age myself a lot faster, or I can, take a risk, jump into something that I know that I'm pretty good at and I have full support of. Yeah. It's funny to me that you asked this question because I know that it's difficult for other people to make that decision for themselves. But for me, it was literally a no-brainer.
It was interesting when you said about people who have their day scheduled out, and I was like, oh my God, that's me. Like I have it like my to-do list written out, my schedule. I like to know what's happening. I like for not only for the day, but for the week, for the month. And like I sort of tried to stop doing this, but at one point I was like 18 months of things booked in, and I was like, oh my God, I need to stop this. This is getting absolutely crazy. How was life training for the Paralympics and just, being an athlete full time? Like, how was that for you mentally, physically, emotionally?
Oh, it was awesome. Like mentally a little bit tasking or physically a little bit more draining than you would expect, but that's kind of the point. Mentally, it was awesome because I got a degree in nutrition, because it was something that my mother inspired me to pursue. Just like most, I would say, women, especially in the United States, we've been lied to intentionally. And so my mother struggled with weight her whole life. And it was the one thing where it felt like when we talked about it, it wasn't like, oh, she knew it all. She was just also trying to figure it out and was just a human and capable of mistakes and still also on this journey of growth, trying to figure out what actually is true with nutrition. And so that was kind of my drive behind getting a degree, a bachelor's and also a master's in nutrition, is to just try to figure out, do we actually know what is happening metabolically with ourselves? And to a degree, yes, we do. But is that the way that it is promoted and almost actually not just promoted, but advertised to us? No, really. I was in that space to learn what it was like to actually take control of my own health. However, that wasn't everybody else's perspective and their motivation. Everybody else that I interacted with in that space was there to just make money. And when I decided to quit, I was actually now practicing what I was learning rather than just thinking about it. So it was really mentally better for me to put my knowledge to physical action, and just like the training aspect and like having an end goal, such as like going to the Paralympics, just gave me a way to learn how to structure my time. Like I said, I usually don't plan things out. So this was a healthy dose of scheduling and staying on a certain path.
Did you already have the knowledge about putting that training plan in place, or did you hire a coach, or were you getting help from, there must be Paralympics is that financially supported in the States? Like, is there like money and grants and stuff available?
So I had, like I said, the community to help me. So I got some grants also from nonprofits to support that funding for a coach. And I just turned towards my community. My community really, really, really supported me, not just with the training aspect, but with like the adaptations I needed. And like people would let me just borrow really nice race equipment for events. So really, this was like my success has been accumulation of what the San Diego cycling community actually has to offer and their support. But yeah, that's where I got like all that information.
Did you get to the Paralympics?
I did not, in a short answer. I am really grateful that I didn't, because the Tokyo Paralympics were scheduled for 2020. But obviously everybody knows the pandemic kind of shut that down and postponed them. So my story really changed when that happened. So up into that point, I wasn't using any prostheses for cycling. And even though people would tell me, the same people who were helping me with all my other training and my bike mechanics, they were like, hey, you should consider it. My answer was always just like, what do you know about having one hand? It was just like me being stubborn and kind of like reverting back to that childhood trauma of realizing like, this is just the way I've lived my life. And so this is the way I'm going to continue to live my life because it's gotten me to a lot of great places. So when the Tokyo Paralympics were postponed and the pressure of results and also kind of that path of like, hey, you should be riding this type of bike and going to these events. Once all that was lifted and alleviated, I actually started figuring out what I wanted to do, not necessarily what role fit for everybody else for me to follow. And I found myself mountain biking. And it was so freeing. Like I am and have always been the type of person who would rather spend their time outdoors rather than kind of like along or inside and also like going around in circles physically, like metaphorically and like literally and not go anywhere. So mountain biking was such a huge challenge for me. It made me realize that I actually started to rethink that stubborn mindset. And I was like, wow, if I don't use prosthetic device, then I'm actually limiting what I can actually do. And I am super grateful that I had that experience during a time that I think a lot of other people suffered. It actually helped me grow in a lot of ways that I don't think that anybody else could have said in a way that I would listen because it all came from me internally. And when you ride, even with people on trails, you're kind of by yourself in a way where there's a couple of things. Like one, if there's like a negative thought in your head, like you know it comes from yourself and not necessarily from someone else. But also two, if there's a mistake that happens, there's nobody else around you for you to blame. So I found myself on mountain bike trails in nature, realizing that, hey, like I do need a prosthesis if I want to get better at this sport. So that's why I am really grateful for that. And when things went, quote, back to normal in 2021, and I started not just using a prosthesis, but also went back to that kind of structured schedule of, oh, I have to be here at this time and ride that bike. It made me realize that like this is not who I am, even though it is a great avenue and outlet for a lot of people with disabilities. It just wasn't my thing. And I actually got like pretty depressed. So I told myself like, hey, like jump through the hoops and you can do this no matter what happens with the outcome. The next year, the following year, 2022, you get to ride whatever bikes that you want. So when I didn't make the team, I realized that, oh, I just get to do what I want faster now, like a little bit sooner.
But I didn't realize that the Paralympics, especially in the cycling, they don't offer, the Olympics have road, track, BMX and mountain biking, but the Paralympians, they only compete in road and track cycling. Do you know, I just wasn't aware of that. I just assumed that the events were just the same.
Yeah.
You know, if the Summer Olympics, they're offering those four options for riders, then the Paralympics, it would be the same as well. Because it's not like you can't ride a mountain bike or do a BMX.
Right. Yeah, absolutely not. I totally agree. And I believe that is why I am on this mission to make mountain biking a Paralympic sport because it should be. And what I'm finding is that there's two extremes. On one end, there are people who are not disabled, but in the position to change what bikes are allowed to be ridden at the Paralympic level. And they project what they think they would be capable of in our situation. And so I've gotten a lot of pushback from this extreme of people, and they say, like, oh, it's unsafe. Except when you think about it, road cycling is very unsafe. It's probably the most unsafe, especially for paracyclists, because I feel unsafe riding an upright two-wheeled bike. There are people who ride recumbrance and hand cycles, which are lower to the ground. They have three wheels, which means that it needs a flat surface to stay balanced. And bike lane are always in the gutter. And the road is made to work with water to drain water into the gutters. So it's always off camber. And also, not to mention the fact that there's always vehicles, like 1,000-pound vehicles, moving at a minimum of 25 miles an hour, sharing the same space with you. On trails, yeah, there are rocks, and trees and cliffs, but they don't move. They're not coming at you at any type of speed. So it's like really, in my experience, not that unsafe. It's actually more empowering. So on the other end of the spectrum, I know a bunch of adaptive riders who have ridden hand cycles, tandems, and also adaptive mountain bikes. And every person who I've talked to who actually has experienced the sport with a disability, they find it free. And I think that it is better for me mentally as a person to spend my time in an environment with adaptive mountain bikers rather than trying to fight the other end of the spectrum, like the able-bodied, non-adaptive mountain bikers with my words. That is my approach into getting mountain biking to be a Paralympic sport, is to actually focus on the community and the grassroots efforts that are already there in place.
Tell me more about your mountain biking experiences. Are you mainly doing, sort of one-off days? Are you doing multi-day challenges? What does that look like?
Right now, this year, I've been, like I said, gravitating towards more of the adaptive mountain biking spaces. And so there's not a lot of people in the US who have the resources, the time, or the support system to make that happen. So I'm going to them. And so, like, for example, this past month, I went to an adaptive mountain biking clinic in Boise, Idaho. And I was an upper limb mentoring coach for those who had either ridden a mountain bike in their past and then they had an acquired disability and want to get back into it, or people who have like lived with their disability their whole life but have never tried mountain biking. So there's a range of different skill levels, and my job was to adapt to each person's needs, which in my experience is just listening to where they are and acknowledging it and letting them also choose the way that they want to proceed. I think that's the biggest key that is missing from not just any adaptive sport, but for the disabled community itself, is we feel like our voices aren't heard with all this new technology and where the space is trending. For example, my prosthesis, like when I say like, hey, like I should be able to sweat in this socket, the answer is always, well, that's not the way technology works. Or like, here, get Botox. And again, making me feel like I'm the problem when really I'm not the problem. I have other solutions. I'm actually the solution.
Are you a full-time sponsored athlete now, or do you have a full-time or a job at the moment and do your cycling on the side?
So when I was training for the Tokyo Paralympics, I was full-time athlete because everybody They hear that word Paralympics and they're like, yeah, like we're totally going to support you. But now that I am fully committed to adaptive mountain biking and being more of a pun intended trailblazer, that support isn't there. It's not as easy to get. So my whole life, I've just been making it up as I go. I call it, I don't know, adapting. And so that's just what I do every day. You could call it a hustle if you want. But yeah, to me, it's just, this is the way I've lived my life ever since I was born. So I'm just gonna just keep living my life that way, but also for myself now.
Tell me about the White Rim Trail and that challenge.
In efforts to make mountain biking a Paralympic sport, I believe, and I've learned from grad school, that people will remember 10% of what they hear, 20% of what they read, but 80% of what they experience. So the film Trendsetters is actually my brainchild. There's my idea to get a group of 5 paracyclists who, full disclosure, had been mountain biking longer than I have ever been at the time. And we rode the White Rim Trail, which is a 100-mile mountain biking trail in Canyonlands National Park, in less than 24 hours. The idea, again, was to not just share the experience with an amazing group of badass riders, but to also provide everybody else who is watching the film, whether you are a person with a disability or an ally for people with disabilities, or if you're just, a cyclist person, give you a way to experience what adaptive mountain biking actually looks like and feels like for the group of riders. I think that in general, I think everybody understands that most media portrays a certain type or story, or you could say stereotype of marginalized voices and communities. And I have experienced that, especially with other films like Go Josie, and I've been a part of like a quote reality TV show on bicycles. And I always remember it differently than what is actually edited and portrayed. And so Trendsetters was actually my way of speaking up for myself and to also give everybody else that same opportunity as well.
You've mentioned you've got a background in nutrition, you've got bachelor's, master's in nutrition. When you're taking on these like 100-mile mountain biking challenges, in terms of food and fueling, what sort of food are you eating before a challenge? What do you eat during a challenge? And what are you eating to help with the recovery afterwards?
So bottom line, no matter what it is, before, during, and after, I'm just eating real food. And that was a thing that definitely set me apart from the other athletes when I was training at an elite level. I noticed, and I think this is one of the things that saved me, how my education and nutrition helped me, is that there's a market for everything. And even at the elite level, you're getting marketed to, like you are the audience. And so there are things like, yes, it does make sense. For example, having a hydration solution with electrolytes to increase the water absorption so you can go longer, faster, harder, stronger. However, the way that things are done in the United States culture is that you can brand something as healthy or beneficial, but you don't actually have to prove it with science. So I knew how to actually read a label and realize like, oh, some things are actually going to not do what it's branded to say or marketed to say. For example, like if you have too much sugar in a hydration solution because electrolytes don't really taste good, but they need it to taste good, so people will continue to buy it. That can actually create a really high sugary content of solution in your stomach and your gut, and that will actually pull more water out of your blood because of osmosis, and it would actually dehydrate you more than help you. So even though it's marketed as electrolytes, yes, it does have that in it, but depending on the concentration and also that person's adaptations to using that product, it's not actually guaranteed to do what it's marketed to say. It's really not rocket science. I just eat real food, and the fresher, the better. So I try to eat as much locally sourced and not just sustainable, but regenerative products that actually put more growth into the environment that they're living in. Because even with any type of product, there's an even person, there's like, I wouldn't say right or wrong, but like intentional or a destructive way of going through that process. So whether it's, like riding your bike, if you can be destructive to your physical health, your social life, and your mental health if you're riding for less intentional reasons. But if you're doing it with intention, then the riding can actually benefit you and like re-energize you rather than deplete you. And the same goes with the way that things are grown in the United States. Like you could have something that is grown destructively, like you only focus on one product, which ends up not just killing that crop, but also depleting the earth of their natural resources. And that also has a side effect on the wildlife and the ecosystem that where that crop is grown. Or you can make it beneficial and regenerative, where it actually promotes growth within the landscape that crop is grown. So you have that with everything. Like you have that with sugar, you have it with grains, you have it with vegetables, like anything that is out there. There's an intentional way and also a destructive way of going about using that product. And so going back to your question, like I just eat real food. It's that simple.
Mentally on these challenges, what do you do when things get tough? And I know I know your nickname is Miss Stubbornness, but what are the mental tips and tricks that you're using, to push on through when the times do get tough when you're out on a trail?
I just think about physics. And a lot of times when the trail gets tough, it's either like steep, loose, rocky, or something. I just think about the physics. And I know it kind of goes back to like a time and a place where it was a little traumatic for a lot of people, especially if you're not very analytical, like I am. Basically, the faster I ride my bike through that part, then the shorter time I have to suffer through it. But then also at the same time, I'm increasing the force that I'm creating to push against whatever force is tougher. So whether it's like the rocks or the gradient or anything. So it's like, that's what I think about. I'm just like, okay, I think about what's going to get me through this section rather than how difficult it is. Because I think everybody who has ridden a mountain bike, whether it's adaptive or not, you realize really quickly that it's such an intense and intentional sport where it's like you create your outcome. So if you keep thinking about crashing, of course you're going to crash because that's all you're thinking about. So I put myself into this mental state where I think about what's going to get me through it so I can actually get through it. And at the end of the day, it's just physics. It's just about like making sure that your wheels keep turning no matter what speed, but through the difficult parts, like speed is my friend. And yeah, I can see how mentally that's hard for people who have fears and worries and doubts of their own capabilities. But no matter like what you ride, 2 wheels, 3 wheels, 4 wheels, 1 wheel, whatever it is, they want to roll. So work with the physics rather than against it.
I've never heard an answer like that, which I absolutely love. And I think, what's going to happen is that is going to stick in people's heads, and people are going to be out on a trail and they'll be like, think of the physics. And they won't know why they're thinking of the physics and what physics they need to think of. They'll just know that they need to think of physics. Josie, honestly, it's been so great to speak to you. Where are you most active on social media? How can people follow along, keep up to date with all your cycling adventures and challenges?
So I'm most active on Instagram, and my handle is Miss Stubbornness. And if you want to watch Trendsetters, I'll send you the link to the landing page. There are two versions, one with only captions, but then there's another version with both captions and audio descriptions for anybody who wants to hear what it's like to have a little bit more detail in the video.
Awesome. I'll add all of those links to the show notes so that people can get access to it. But Josie, I would love for you to have the final words of advice, final words of wisdom for other women out there. I feel like I want to say like who are also wanting to change the world in whatever form that takes. What advice would you like to share? And you can take it in any direction. Please don't say that just do it. Any other advice apart from that?
I would just like to say that helping people with the greatest needs actually creates a way and a path that is accessible for anyone. A really clear example is, I have two of them actually. One is an electric toothbrush that was actually designed for people who have less use of fine motor skills, and it actually helps everybody else brush their teeth better. And the second one is a keyboard that was designed for people with disabilities that is like super useful for everybody else. I keep that in mind with making adaptive mountain biking a Paralympic sport, because if that is true with the electric toothbrush and a keyboard, then helping people get onto adaptive bikes actually creates a way that makes the outdoors accessible to everybody.
Josie, thank you so much for coming on the Tough Girl podcast and sharing more about your passions and interests. It's been absolutely fascinating to speak to you, and just best of luck with changing the world of cycling and for encouraging the Paralympics to make mountain biking a sport. I have no doubt that you will get it done.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This has been super fun.
Hey tribe, how are you doing on this beautiful, glorious day? I hope you're all keeping super well. I really hope you enjoyed the episode with Josie. What an absolute inspiration, and that she has inspired you to think about your next challenge and your next adventure. Everything that we have talked about today will be available in the show notes at toughgirlchallenge.com. So please do go and check it out. Go and check out the website. You can find more information about me, Tough Girl Challenges, and more about the incredible women who have also shared their story on the Tough Girl podcast. There is now over 700 episodes for you to choose from. If you go and check out the resources page, there is a page dedicated specifically to cyclists, and we have spoken to a massive variety of women, all things cycling. So we've spoken to Dr. Meera Valankar. She's a scientist turned tandem cyclist. She's been exploring India since 2015. She's the first woman to complete India's golden quadrilateral, which connects Mumbai, Delhi, Chennai and Kolkata on a tandem bike, 6,000 kilometers in 41 days. Megan Hatkin recently came on the Tough Girl podcast and shared more about bike packing and sharing more about her new book, Shifting Gears, Coast to Coast on the Trans Am Bike Race. We have spoken with Claire Wyatt, who's passionate about bicycle touring and sharing stories of kindness from around the world. She's currently cycling 16,000 kilometers around Australia. Tegan Phillips has been on. She's an adventure cyclist and cartoonist who was preparing for a second attempt at being the fastest woman to cycle from Cairo to Cape Town. Kate Strong, a 3-time cycling world record holder, high performance coach and climate advocate. In June 2023, Kate will start a 3-month cycle on a bamboo bike around mainland Britain. Reminds me I need to do a Tough Girl podcast episode with Kate and have a little catch up, see how her amazing cycle journey went. Laura Maisie Pugh, been on the podcast twice now. She shares more about her inspiring journey around the world, 180 days on the back of a tandem with her husband, persevering in the face of challenges and setting a new Guinness World Record. We've had Dr. Carla Benton on. She's a clinical psychologist, a queer vegan and a lover of all things outdoors. She was awarded the Ultra Distance Scholarship in 2021, which is aimed at increasing representation of BAME cyclists in ultra distance cycling. So many incredible women sharing their stories and sharing their passion and their love for cycling. If that is something that you love to do, then take a listen to these incredible women on the Tough Girl podcast. If you'd like to support the work that I do to increase the amount of female role models in the media, then please do go and visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl podcast. Thank you again for listening. Thank you for telling one friend about the Tough Girl podcast. I don't think I've actually asked this for a while, but if you haven't done so already, I would love for you to leave like a 5-star review on your listening platform. it just encourages other people to think, all right, you know, I'll give the Tough Girl podcast a chance. I'm not sure what I'm going to be getting into when I start listening to this, but if you could leave a review and just share some of your thoughts, reasons you listen to the podcast, any benefits that you've received, then hopefully more women will be inspired to take a listen. And who knows, you could end up changing their life. So pay it forward, tell a friend, share it on social media, leave a review. All that's left for me to say is, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, give it your all, give it 110%, get after it, go for it, believe in yourself, because I believe in you. Take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.